Well, this is more like it. Finally, a game that combines platforming and exploration. Metroidvania begins here. Of course, Pitfall wasn't a proper Metroidvania game, if such a thing could even be said to exist. It could not, of course. Metroidvania is a silly made-up word that means nothing and is in no way proper. But the point of this series is to explore the evolution of exploratory platformers and action RPGs, and in that sense, Pitfall has a tremendous legacy. Debuting April 20th, 1982, Pitfall took the platforming mechanics laid down in Donkey Kong and applied them to something grander than a single-screen action game. Sure, Pitfall lacks scrolling and takes place across a series of individual self-contained screens, but the density of design here was far looser than in arcade games of the era. You look at early platform games like Donkey Kong, Kangaroo, Rock and Rope, and Burger Time, and you see that their single-screen layouts are crammed full of tiers, and everything feels tiny and compact. Pitfall, on the other hand, let its world unfurl more loosely. Two paths run parallel, and that's about it. This decompression of design had plenty of precedent, of course. We saw it in Adventure, where the game world spread across multiple screens. Those screens, however, retained an incredibly dense design sensibility, packed with labyrinthine passages that required careful navigation. A more direct predecessor to Pitfall's design came in 1981 with Defender, Williams' blazing fast shoot-'em-up. With Defender, creator Eugene Jarvis took the endless loop design of asteroids and broke it from its single-screen format, creating a play space several screens wide. By creating a world that existed beyond the boundaries of what the player could see at a glance, Defender benefited in several ways. First, it created a sensation of persistence within action games, the concept that things existed beyond the player's view and would continue to act even when out of sight. Defender provided a radar minimap along the upper edge of the screen that allowed players to take in events all across the game world at a glance. Secondly, Defender's decompressed structure made for a much faster game. Because the screen scrolled with the player, zipping around became less disorienting. The player's craft would always appear near the center of the screen. Hazards could be spaced further apart too, allowing Jarvis to give players the ability to cover much more pixel real estate with their movements without compromising the number of hazards in the active game world. Pushing beyond the bounds of a single screen had a transformative effect, changing not only Defender, but countless games to follow, including Pitfall. Granted, Pitfall didn't or couldn't make use of scrolling graphics the way Defender did, but designer David Crane did his best to incorporate its concept of a world that spanned far beyond what the player could see. In fact, Pitfall deliberately and actively fooled the player's perception. The game's jungle world consisted of a sort of Mebius strip of 256 screens arranged in a line, and any player who could make their way from screen 1 to screen 256 would loop back to screen 1 after clearing the last scene. However, the path through the jungle sprawled out across two levels, along the surface of the ground and along a subterranean route that ran beneath the surface. These tracks never crossed over, but occasionally players would have the opportunity to use a ladder to switch tracks. What isn't immediately apparent when you first begin playing Pitfall is that the underground path operates under different rules than the jungle route. Where the overworld is strictly a linear march from screen 1 to 256, the dark spaces beneath the ground work as a sort of warp, often skipping over multiple screens at a time. As such, Pitfall became the first action game that demanded its fans sit down and map out routes, breaking down the complex arrangement of what initially appears to be a simple linear path. The game presented players with a very simple goal: collect a number of treasures within 20 minutes. This proved to be more difficult than it might sound, though. Many treasures appeared in seemingly inaccessible underground spaces, so you could see them while tramping about overhead, but had to figure out how to reach them. Pitfall isn't a true Metroidvania game in that Pitfall Harry never acquires any sorts of power-ups or skill upgrades, and you don't need any tools to make your way through the world. But the concept of tantalizing players with seemingly unreachable pickups and challenging them to figure out how to work their way through the world to collect them, that is 100% Metroidvania. And while we saw a little bit of that with Adventure, Pitfall took the idea and literally ran with it. Pitfall also introduced the idea of backtracking in a sense. The optimal route through the game to collect all the jungle treasures ideally demands you double back early on to take an underground shortcut from screen 12 to screen 246, emerging from the lower route from time to time to pick up treasures or change shortcut paths. It's a tricky and devious game, and it's not an easy one. In addition to the pretzel-like arrangement of the map, Pitfall also demands you deal with platforming hazards like scorpions, alligators, and, yeah, pitfalls. Crane managed to squeeze all of this into just a few kilobytes of storage space, meaning Pitfall is as much a feat of creative programming as it is a pioneering work of design. Ultimately, though, it was Pitfall's design innovations that had the more lasting impact, though the game did establish third-party Activision as a force to be reckoned with. Pitfall arrived about a year and a half after Donkey Kong, and shortly after Donkey Kong Jr. The similarities between certain hazards in the games highlight what Crane brought to the platformer. One of the first dangers you have to deal with in Pitfall is a set of rolling logs that tumble across the jungle floor and look an awful lot like Donkey Kong's barrels. These appear more predictably than Kong's barrels, though, and they operate more simplistically due to the less complex layouts of Pitfall's platforming spaces. Rather than demanding quick reactions from players, they instead become a matter of timing and prediction. Likewise, the snapping alligator pools more than slightly resemble Donkey Kong Jr.'s Snapjaw traps. Where Kong's Snapjaws moved in randomized patterns along vines and flooring, though, Pitfall's gators sit in place and open their mouths cyclically. In short, the Donkey Kong approach to platformers gave players a self-contained space whose dangers resulted from the chaotic, dynamic hazards within. Pitfall turns the environment itself into the enemy. You'll always encounter logs and scorpions in the same places, and the challenge isn't so much to outmaneuver them as it is to learn to navigate the maze-like paths while being mindful of the dangers along the way. It's a subtle difference, but it's a meaningful one. Pitfall belongs to the platformer genre, but athleticism and finger speed are less of the essence here than planning and exploration. Pitfall is a game about seeking a high score, yes, but the real challenge is simply to figure out how to complete the adventure. Needless to say, Pitfall would have a huge influence on countless games to come. The UK would quickly see its own enormously successful variant on Pitfall, with Manic Miner and Jet Set Willy, and countless other treasure-hunting adventures would pop up across PCs and consoles the world over, including Spelunker, Pharaoh's Curse, and Montezuma's Revenge. Almost as quickly as it was conceived, the platformer genre began straining at the boundaries of arcade design to become a vessel for more demanding works of greater complexity, and Pitfall led the charge.